special thing. It's not what you feel. You can see in thoughts. Is it really yours? Come and hold me now. I can make you feel.
We're going to kick off this study group focusing on session 13. Thanks everybody for coming out. It's so awesome that we have 7 people who are knowledgeable about this topic and willing to discuss it and put their cards on the table. I'm going to let Steve kick it off with a topic that he wanted to bring up.
Well, it's a passage, so it's right at the beginning. I thought it might be wise to begin at the beginning. And it says, the first known thing. All right, well, here's the question. Can you tell me of the earliest first known thing in the creation? And Ra says, the first known thing in the creation is infinity. The infinity is creation. So there seems to be no transcendence of infinity in relation to the creation. So that's kind of a step towards pantheism, right?
It's something I've considered a lot.
So here would be a question. Do you know the old dispute between so-called pagan mysticism and Christian mysticism? The Christianity plumed itself in being the progenitor of monotheism, and that meant that there was something called creation from nothing, creation ex nihilo. It was creation from nothing. And so God creates the cosmos, everything that is, angels, the whole ball of wax. God creates it from nothing. Whereas the old pagan view was that divinity is to be conceived as a bringing into order, as creative, in the sense of bringing in order into chaos. So it suggests that the prior state is chaos. Although, so what does chaos mean? Well, that Christianity was very happy to interpret chaos as meaning disordered things. And then they point to their opponents laughingly and say that you haven't explained why there are things in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Christianity does, right? Creation ex nihilo. That's what God does. But that puts God behind the scenes. And it doesn't, in a sense, you could say it doesn't give God any skin in the game. And this answer already says that God's got skin in the game from the beginning. That the infinity, which is the first, is already the creation. There's a relationship of identity between those two things.
Yeah, and kind of the way that I look at it, just my personal view, kind of how I put these pieces together to create a narrative or some sort of explanation that I can feel like I can follow along, is that like looking at the creation as infinity, as in other words, one unified whole, is one way of looking at that whole. The other way of looking at it is to conceive of it as having many components, and that both of these ways are perspectives on the same object, so to speak, the same unified thing.
Well, there's a third way, Jeremy.
Oh, I'm sure.
And that is that you're experiencing it from within it.
Yeah. That is what is. So now we're getting to the thing that first boggled my mind, because in this first step referenced in question 5, I feel like there is no duality, right?
Um,
Not yet. Well,
I-
isn't
the
part of the
question, I don't know.
isn't part of the whole confusion too just because like we just need to perceive things in a linear fashion, and then this is like infinity is like not the opposite of that, like
well,
I mean,
but Jamie, do you remember that later on, one of the paradoxes that Ra points to is that infinity paradoxically expresses itself linearly.
right, yeah, it does, and it, yeah, paradoxically, yes.
A straight line.
Can
Yeah.
can I give a little bit of my input?
Please.
It's a little difficult, but I feel like a meditation I had pretty recently is really relevant here. And I'll make it really brief, but like, I feel like a lot of with these passages that are very cryptic, that I like can't make any sense of them until I have some kind of direct experience that feels like it's what they're talking about, or something about like what they're talking about. And then and then it ends up being something that I totally wasn't conceptualizing in the very first place, because I had an experience that now I'm sort of like hooking onto that passage. That's this is just an example of that. So I had, lots of rolling around interpretations of this passage. And then recently I had this meditation where I was praying to the creator, and I was pretty deep in, it was like a few hours into meditation. And I was praying, and I kept feeling like there was something behind. The feeling I had was there was something behind the creator who I was praying to. And I kept moving behind, and there was just layer after layer after layer after layer after layer of the creator. And then at some point I moved behind, and it was I like distinctly heard this pop noise. And then I was in this, I wasn't actually really in it. I kind of felt like I was at the edge of it. So that was, I misspoke, but I felt this thing, I had this experience, and the only like way that I could describe it is that it felt like complete total allowance. Like that's the word that could like come closest to this feeling. And that it was it like a whole like a really intense experience, but the feeling was total complete allowance. And then later I am relating it back to this sort of like the cosmology explained by Ra, and it feels like something like what they're talking about, that this infinity, it really just, to me now, the way that I'm interpreting it is it's really just like unconditional allowance. So anyway, that was really long. Sorry how long
That was beautiful. No, that was beautiful.
That might be unconditional allowance might be a great way of expressing, in other words, the very idea of potential, right? The very idea of the unrestrained potentiality of everything that's inherent in intelligent infinity.
It's almost like there's something about the characteristic of free will that is really embedded in this feeling, and that even before consciousness there's this allowance, because consciousness, I mean, now I'm being rational, whereas before it was totally irrational. It was just feeling an experience. But like, as I'm making sense of it, it's like consciousness comes through free will. I feel like when I'm reading Ra, I get I interpret it as what they're saying is that even the creator started with the free will to become conscious.
Yeah. Honestly, Autumn, one of the things that I'm hoping we can work through here is mapping. So there is in session 13 kind of a point by point sequence of events. I'm hoping that I would like to map the distortions, the first three distortions, to different stages here. And that's where a lot of my confusion came from that I was hoping to y'all could help me with.
All right. The second step,
Right.
May I just add one? Because
infinity became aware.
Yes. What were you going to say, Barsh?
I was just going to say I had a similar meditation to Autumn's, and mine was I was meditating, and then I started kind of seeing this white light, and every concept felt like it was missing the white light. White light was what is behind the concept that could not be conceptualized. Like it was underneath it. It was this, like every concept boxes it, and infinity cannot be boxed.
Yeah.
And it was pure, again, that white light was beingness, and was this, yeah. Anyway, that's kind of how I experienced it.
Yeah. So so what Steve was saying, the second step is infinity becoming aware. Now that's really interesting in the sense that, well, in one sense at least, which is that how could you talk about creation or infinity being known if there is no awareness? Is there a
And,
distinction
and,
there?
and further, that awareness itself is rooted in becoming. It's a becoming thing right from the get-go. So it
That's a good point.
it is emergent from a background of not yet aware, and 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 that's where the potential part of the Godhead would seem to reside, back in that area where the Godhead isn't yet itself, but is in the process of becoming itself. So it's definitely a process way of thinking about the Godhead in order to become aware. And that's totally anti-Christian theology.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Christian theology, God is better, everything is better to be than not to be. And so God is perfection. And there's no need for God to learn because God already knows everything. Right?
Yeah.
This is a God of becoming. And we are invited to join in that circle, as Otto attempted to do, in participating in that Godhead.
So later on, they talk about, what is the next step? Well, the next step is still in process. It's this continuing sort of unfoldment or continuing process of, what do they say?
Well, that's quite
Achieve
important.
the
It's
next step
the
is an
focus of infinity into infinite energy. So, because of this awareness, now there's a great leap forward here. Because of this awareness, who knows how long that goes on or how deep that is before it achieves the desire to focus infinity into infinite energy. It because of this awareness, or within this awareness, there emerges the propensity to focus infinity into infinite energy. Now, that's even before love comes on the scene,
ostensibly.
let
I'm
alone.
wondering about that.
And so there's an energy that is not manifest. Light is manifest energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this is unmanifest energy that precedes love, logos. There's probably 1,000 other words for that. And that precedes what we experience as energy in a manifest sense, which is to say light.
Yeah. The one thing I was going to say was the becoming aware, in the same way that in 13.8, they say, okay, the next step is still unfolding. It's this progression, this reaction towards the creation. So like the idea being that all the subsequent steps are kind of subsumed in the next step. And I wonder if infinity becoming aware subsumes all the steps that come after it. In other words, all the steps that come after it are part of infinity becoming aware, right?
Yeah, but for sure, that would have to be true. And so it's the alpha and the omega.
No, it could be that
Beginning,
infinity
yeah.
has to finish becoming aware for the next step to occur. And I'm saying I don't think that's what's being expressed. Right? Do you understand?
Right. That's interesting that you should raise that question, because I think that you're right in terms of Raw's meaning. But note that Don doesn't get it that way in his questions.
No, he wants cause and effect. Cause and effect.
He wants cause and effect, and cause has to precede effect.
Exactly.
And so it's that kind of thinking, and Raw's responses confound that kind of thinking. I think you're right.
I think
I wanted to,
Oh,
go ahead, Autumn.
I just think it depends on whether or not what you mean by becoming aware, whether it's the moment that it initially happens or whether it's the sort of continual.
It's the latter. It's the continual
Well, I'm
process.
not sure. I'm just saying, I think it can be interpreted different ways.
Well, I think the latter predominates here. That's what Jeremy is saying. Yeah, Stephanie.
I was really wanting to go back to this process of awareness. So I'm glad we kind of went back there, because I'm still kind of stuck. Like, how does this infinity, it really kind of strains my brain. How does awareness kind of bubble up
Yeah.
out of this infinity? And do we ever, because that seems to be a big leap to me.
Yes, it's a huge leap. And as my old professor used to say, when it came to all of his very difficult questions with no ultimate answers, that's a very good question.
Maybe Jamie has an answer.
Yeah, I mean,
Well-
it's all you can say is it happened. I mean, it's a mystery. And Ra does say that metaphysics and cosmology and everything else begins and ends in mystery.
Mystery, you're right.
And that's where it is. I mean, it's. I mean, how did we recapitulate the coming into awareness of the Creator? How did we become aware? I mean, you have to think hard to get back into those wee small hours of an incarnation.
Well,
but
And
that's
it's both simultaneous and infant. I mean, it's both simultaneous and what was the other word they used? You'll know what I'm talking about.
So,
Simultaneous and infinite.
Yeah.
So I have a
Jamie had her hand up, and then I was calling you.
We're also enthusiastic. I love this.
Yes.
Well, taking this from what Claire had to say about it, that before it became aware, there was just unity, which is undifferentiated. And for awareness to the concept of awareness to exist, there had to be a subject and an object.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree with that point.
Not me
Okay.
either.
That's a contested.
testing.
Yeah, Nathan, go
Oh, yeah,
ahead.
hey, no. So actually, I love this topic and the questions raised. And Jamie, I was thinking along the lines of the same thing. So for me, the question is, are we looking back? Obviously, it's very difficult to look back at the moment of basically just infinity, right? We're examining it in a linear process. So for me, it raises the question of this creation. It's kind of like initially there's awareness, right? That's a linear process. But if it's undifferentiated potentiality, maybe it's just one version of how our reality is played out. So for example, a very poor analogy is like, before we really realized much about science and the nature of Earth and stuff, people would be like, oh, you need oxygen for life, right? You need a planet with certain conditions. And then we slowly started to realize there's other conditions that can create life. Well, are there other steps? Are there other pathways to a creation that don't involve awareness as the first step, right? That's so the question is are we just looking back and seeing one version of it, or is this the only version, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Does anybody have a response to that?
Well, if one is thinking historically, that is sequentially in the sense of something that is now taking place could not have taken place in the way that it is unless there had been a previous state of affairs, because of a specific modification of that state of affairs. And then that state of affairs presupposes an earlier, and so on into infinity. So then at some point you get back to the beginning, right? Where your first unfolding of awareness is somehow registered. And then there's a sequential development after that first unfoldment. That I think is certainly the way Don would have posed the question. And there's a certain sense in which you can answer that question intelligently by saying, okay, there are these stages that happen, these events that qualitatively mark that way. And so you're led to these questions. Well, would those same kind of events have befallen any possible infinity becoming intelligent? And so, are we dealing with a kind of necessity of a structure here that is what intelligence is? So is as infinity becomes aware, it becomes intelligent. And as it becomes intelligent, at first, there's nothing to be intelligent about except itself, right?
Right.
There's no creation there. And the intelligence that it's getting of itself grows over time. But it would have to grow, wouldn't it, based on its previous efforts at becoming known to itself. So it builds on itself. And that's what growth is for it, right? And so as you look backwards across that, what we're now presenting as a timeline, you get a history and various steps and stages within that history. So it's almost an unanswerable question whether or not you say that it would have to be that way, or it would be that way for any possible creation, or it was this way in the process of the self-discovery of the creator, in whose being I have my being. So I don't know how you answer that question. All you can say is, it is what it is.
Yeah, I tend to, Nathan, I follow very much along your lines in the sense that I think the infinity that is creation is like a thought experiment that kind of is all happening simultaneously, but we dilate it temporally because we are the organs by which this awareness is coming into full awareness of itself, that we are the becoming aware part. But the idea that we're the only possible becoming aware part, yeah, I think that the idea of infinite potential means that the exploration of that potential is always a quest for what's a necessity arising from it, right? It's like a backwards looking appraisal of what was thereby, by the very sheer fact that it unfolded that way, necessary.
So,
Yeah.
let me ask another question then. What do we perceive raw means, or this concept of awareness? What exactly is it? Because at least if you just take the lay word of the lay definition of the word awareness, like in my everyday life, something can happen, but I might not be aware of it. So is this an infinity where the structure that we see is already happening, and then but the awareness is kind of like a looking back, or does awareness itself somehow cause some of this structure to formulate?
Well, awareness as a concept applies also to first density, remember. And so there's a certain sense in which there's a kind of a background awareness, like that's in the sense that we, participate in the livingness of the rocks of the planet. And so that's background, and it's always going on. And on top of that, there's the kind of self-differentiating awareness that you get in the animal kingdom. And then on top of that, the self-consciously self-differentiating awareness that presupposes all these other steps. So in all of these stages, and then so on and so forth into fourth, fifth, and sixth density versions of awareness of other and awareness of self, in which both self and other become part of the same awareness in the higher densities. So you've got all these layered versions of awareness that are hierarchically arranged, and they recapitulate, Ross says, the discovery of awareness or becoming intelligent of infinity. And so there's a lingering behind all this, there's going to be constantly the question, how do we think of that background to the creator? Is it pure potentiality? Is it a seething abyss of nothing but pent up energy, chaos? And what we think of as the creator is that moment in which intelligent infinity, having become aware, begins to channel that energy. Is that the way we think about this? It seems like a dynamic conception that's being offered here.
Certainly.
Because right at the beginning, this concept of energy is brought into play.
That's a good thing to account for. Another thing I'd like to ask is, do we think that awareness and consciousness are like two ways of saying the same thing, or do we think Ra means something different by consciousness and awareness?
Consciousness requires another.
Doesn't awareness?
No.
Oh, so you can be aware of. Is it just a linguistic anomaly that I can't?
Well, if you look at the Latin root, when you say con, that means other. And so it suggests bifurcation.
Yeah, but what about awareness? What does it mean?
Awareness doesn't suggest bifurcation.
Okay.
And it's more primordial.
I use those
Sure,
interchangeably, so I'm interested in hearing more about Steve's separation of those two terms. Can you repeat yourself or explain it a little bit more, Steve?
The quote that Jamie gave that I actually disagreed with, I would agree with on as a definition of consciousness, in the sense that ordinarily when we know something, right? And so the knower is then pitted over and against that which is known. So there's a division, a bifurcation, duality there. And consciousness seems to have that kind of structure. And in fact, as it even at a very primitive level, as we make our way through life, we have to think of the world as populated by other centers of force, that some of which are good and some of which aren't, and we have to make distinctions and so forth. So consciousness emerges out of that kind of that focused form of intelligence. And culturally, we have learned to organize consciousness. And, we have language, we have educational systems. We have traditions and so on and so forth, and we have values, and all of that are focused in the way that we experience our consciousness. Now, and awareness is a much broader term, and it goes all the way down to the level of rocks, Ra would say, even to the point that Ra was able to issue an invitation of rocks to orient their awareness so he could build the pyramids, or they could build the pyramids. Anyway, I never get my pronouns right.
Yeah, but that still doesn't really. Is it just a linguistic artifact that I can't speak of awareness in any way but transitively?
Uh,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I'm not sure it's entirely a linguistic artifact. I will agree with you that our language doesn't make it easy to talk about those kinds of things. But awareness would simply be this. It's almost like a sleeping, almost like a dreamless sleep in which dreams slowly begin to form, but only in a kind of vacuous way in terms of feelings, the ebb and flow of feelings. I think that's probably a better way to clock the notion of this kind of very primordial form of awareness.
And the mere fact that you talked about these phenomena in describing awareness, I shouldn't take from that a duality. Is that the
not at the level of the primordial awareness? No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, rocks aren't competitive. Let me just put it that way. Rocks are just quite content to just be just happy to be here, folks.
Well, it says, like, in one question, I can't remember the number right now because I'm just reading it from the book, but it says, can you tell me how intelligent infinity became, shall we say, or how intelligent infinity became individualized from itself?
Yes.
And Ra said the intelligent infinity discerned a concept.
Yes.
So that's almost like a differentiation right there. And this concept was discerned to be the freedom of will, of awareness. This concept was finity. So this is kind of like, there's already the concept of that there could be affinity within infinity. Oh boy.
That's right.
And
and that's the passage that most supports the Christian theology, because it suggests that there is an act of will / cognition on the part of the creator that leads to the thought of the creation, and the thought of the creation precedes the creation. So that puts intentionality in it right there.
Well, that does seem a little, object subject.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
And so so basically, like, because basically the creator wants to experience itself. So that's kind of the first step being kind of like a awareness.
I'd like to also jump in with an excerpt from the session we did on first density timelessness at the fourth training intensive. So Kuo says, now we would invite you to take another leap, a leap back into a condition that is prior even to the one we just described, a condition in which there is a stirring of the air, the wind, there is a heating, the fire, there is the movement of water, there is the receptivity of earth. Let us dissolve this awareness into a feeling of differentiated earthness, airness, fireness, waterness. I could go on, but I think the point.
Did you channel that, Jeremy?
No, you did, sir.
Okay.
Kuo via Timon.
My favorite bits in session 13 when it talks about the first density, the mineral and water life upon the planet, learning from fire and wind, the awareness of being.
Is it possible that this awareness just has a very primitive concept of subject object in the sense of these feelings that are the least differentiated forms of differentiation possible. Is that thinkable?
Yes. I mean, it's feelable anyway. It's thinkable as feelable.
I think it's the best we can do with our semantic limitations, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to go to the mat on all of these questions, but I do appreciate having 6 other interlocutors that I can really dig in with this on. Do we want to go on to the next step, or do we have some more horses to beat? All right.
I say we move on.
All right. So we're at 13.7, I believe. After this, what happened? And Ross says, awareness led to the focus of infinity into infinite energy. You have called this by various vibrational sound complexes, the most common here being logos or love. The creator is the focusing of infinity as an aware or conscious principle called by us as closely as we can create understanding learning in your language, intelligent infinity. All right, so here is the bifurcation between intelligent infinity and intelligent energy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they call it love, because this is what got me thinking, Steve, about, okay, how do we map the 3 distortions to this sequence, right? This seems like second distortion.
Well, it certainly does. And I think the moral that we have to take from it is that we have to split the concept of energy as we understand it into that which carries the primordial differentiation of the creator from itself. And as that settles into a state or a condition, it is called love or logos. And logoi always have the capacity to create, because they are holographic portions of the creator. And so the creation goes on, the torch of creation, if you will, gets passed down from the central sun, if you will, the central creator, to the various logoi. And we haven't yet got to the point where there's anything like a manifest universe.
Yes.
And so these logoi, we don't know how many. Aristotle counted 53. I think there's probably a good deal more than that. I think Rob would say they're infinite. And anytime you ask these questions, it always comes back that way. So I would say they're probably infinite. There's no limit to the counting.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just another way of saying there's no point in counting. That you'll always, that every experiential perspective will always encounter uniqueness. Which is an interesting point here. This is the point at which perspective is introduced into the equation.
As distinct from awareness, I intuit.
Yes.
This is something I'm going to have to think about a lot, because it's hard for me to think of awareness without perception, right?
Well, think of that first moment when you're just waking up in the morning. And you're not even sure if you're willing to wake up, right?
Yeah, worst part of the day, in other words.
Yeah. That one moment, I mean, you're not perceiving anything, really, are you? You're just generally aware, and then perception kicks in so quickly for the most of us that one's hardly worth the transition. But there is a split second there.
And I also note that split second is really only registers after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Like at the time, you can't all right, that's good, Steve, that's good.
Well, I don't think that rocks spend much time contemplating the joy or agony of rockness. They're just there's no split in that thing called primary awareness. But the interesting thing is, it's that primary awareness that's the carrier wave for everything that comes after.
Right.
And it's because and that kind of is an immersion in total unity.
Yes.
And
It's the eighth octave of the last, it's eighth level of the last octave.
yeah, and it gives the possibility right from the beginning that it's from that unity that we have come, and to that unity that we will return. That one all-embracing everythingness, but we return to it having undergone this whole history, and that's what it is, a history of experiences.
Yeah.
Perspectively qualified experiences.
I have a perspective on the second distortion I could share here.
Please.
Well, it's not, I'm sharing this again from Claire, but I think it's really good. It says, another name Ra gives the second distortion is the creative principle. The logos is a point of perspective within the objective world that is aware of itself as infinite, and so has at its command the power to shape the objective world around itself into an experiment in self-discovery.
I see. I would once again disagree with that way of putting it, because the offending formulation is objective world, because the logoi here are created before there is anything like an objective world. The objective world only comes into being as we know it, or in any form whatsoever. Anything that can be called objective, first of all, has to have the logoi involved. And so, at the level at which you have these gods, these logoi that are the focusing points of all of the more specific creations, at the point at which you have those differentiated from one another, what you have in effect is a kind of intersubjectivity.
Mm-hmm.
It's far more an intersubjectivity than it is standing in relation to an objective world.
Okay.
And, the objective world only comes about within the context of the various creations that the logoi undertake, and that's way down the road.
Okay.
What was the where can I find that quote that you just read, Jamie?
The tarot according to Ra.
Oh, so that's not Ra. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not Ra.
Gotcha. All right. Sorry. Okay.
It's just interesting to hear a different take on it. I like what about the kind of puts like you said something about perspective earlier.
Yeah. The primal distortion is free will, and Ra notably remarks that the discovery of awareness within the creator that leads to the possibility of focus is the realization of free will in the creator. And then that free will which the creator experiences within itself becomes the basis of the first distortion, which is the creative moment. That is, the first thing that is created is the possibility of focus. That's perspective.
Okay.
And when you have an infinity of foci, because the very concept, if your mind is this infinite resonating chamber, you're the creator now, right? And your mind is this infinite resonating chamber, and so you get this concept, and within the mind, the concept is itself an act of creation. Coming to a concept is an act of creation, and that initial act of creation is the realization of the possibility of focus, and that the realization of the possibility of focus, Ra says, is rooted in the creator's expenditure of its own free will. And so it projects that central feature, that free willedness, into the now infinitely realized foci. And you have the first step of creation.
Yeah. There is no free will unless there's something to be chosen relative to something else, right?
Well, no, that isn't right. No, because the free will is discovered by the creator within the creator. It's the creator's own act of free will that is projected onto the creation as the principle of free will and becomes infinitely realized as focus. And that's where perspective is born. And so the creator now instantly fragments into the possibility of infinite perspectives coming back to itself.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just felt like if we went on this basis of the infinity becoming aware, being mapped in some way to the first distortion, right?
Well, its first awareness is not being mapped.
No, no, no.
First awareness is just of itself, and then what arises is that it in its as it becomes aware, it becomes aware of its capacity to plumb the depths of awareness, or in other words, put to the question awareness. Now that creates the possibility within itself of focus, and that then leads to the thought of the possibility of a creation in which these various perspectives or foci are all endowed with that which I have discovered within myself, namely free will. You see that? And so it's intensely self-related there at the beginning within the creator.
I was just remarking that how would it be free will if I'm everything? What freedom is there if there's no ability to differentiate? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, because I'm not putting myself in relation to something other than myself. It's all a question of how I shall disport myself.
Okay, all right.
And so I think this thought now. Well, I can go back to that thought. Well, now I can think two thoughts. I can think two thoughts as one thought. You know, that self-discovery within intelligence of its capacity to become more intelligent.
That actually makes a lot of sense because it implies that, for example, the illusion that we find ourselves in and its characteristics are sort of distortions in our experience of free will is a kind of distortion or stepping down of that more pure idealistic free will that the creator understands in itself.
Well, but even in political philosophy, you have this discussion. You know, the distinction between liberty, for example, which gives you capacity to behave in certain ways, unfettered, and freedom, which is a more metaphysical question, and that raises the question: to what extent am I actually free? And if you posit complete freedom, now you've posited a bit of the Godhead within yourself.
Right.
Because so when I'm thinking, I'm completely free to think any thought I want to think. There's nothing prohibiting me from thinking any thought I might want to think. And in that respect, I am a microcosmic representation of the creator.
That's my intelligent infinity, my body, and the experience I'm having is the intelligent energy. But they're all these very narrowed versions of that, right?
Yeah, focused.
Yeah.
Fractal. I always think, I don't know, I experience this as a lot of I'm not into physics. I don't know all of that stuff, but I experience it in meditation as a fractal.
Yeah, it's a picture we draw in our heads to stand in for something that's completely unthinkable.
Well, with your permission, I'm going to keep on working trying to think it.
grudgingly.
I mean, maybe that's the situation the creator's in, trying to think the unthinkable, right?
Well, I think that's what I think. I think creation that we experience in our lives in particular are the creator's process of thinking these things through. We just experience them as this time dilated thing. The creator
ultimately, there has to be a sense in which pure creation and pure discovery are one and the same thing.
Right, exactly. Yes, well said.
Can you repeat that again, Steve?
Pure creation and pure discovery are one and the same thing.
It all centers on this idea of necessity. Right?
Not for me. Let me assure you, my experience of both, can be quite different from one another. In fact, I read and read and read and read and discover very little sometimes. But at the ultimate level, that is, within the creator, those two things would be one and the same thing.
There's also something I wanted to point out, these sort of like identity statements that Ra makes, where they say earlier, the infinity is creation. But then later on, they say the creator is the focusing of infinity. In other words, the creator is this infinity in its focused form. Is that kind of how you read that?
The infinity is creation. Well, everything turns on that word is. I don't want to get
exactly.
too Bill Clinton-ish. But
I kind of think of it as focusing is shaping. It's starting to, yeah, like I can't experience this as anything but a linear. Like I try my very hardest to imagine it or grasp it as a simultaneous process. But I kind of, it's taking shape. It's starting to focus. It's starting to find its.
What if we said that there's an asymmetry emerging?
An asymmetry?
Asymmetry such that it would need to go from imbalance back to balance, that there's a dynamic created by this asymmetry of focus. I mean, the idea of focus is that you're narrowing down the aperture of perception to this small window, right? But it doesn't mean all this other stuff doesn't exist. It means you're.
I have a tough question. Does the creation create the creator, or does the creator create the creation?
Well, this is basically the question I'm asking.
Or the dream, the dreaming, and the dreamer. Like, you know what I'm.
Yeah. And so the infinity is creation. And when we talk about creator with a capital C, now we're talking about something that takes place seemingly within the creation as the focusing of infinity. That's the way that seems to play out logically. So that would say that the creator, to the extent that it is, I think maybe we would do well to use that word crystallization as we apply it to the energy centers.
Yes.
It's like the creation gets crystallized as the creator. So now you have a focuser of infinity.
The crystal metaphor also works in the sense that as we go into the next question, they talk about this chaos being expressed that then organizes into patterns, and crystals are patterns, right?
Yeah.
Like they have this regularity to them.
There's a creation of regularity within irregularity, within randomness.
And I think that chaos is kind of what I was hinting at when I talked about asymmetry, right?
Yeah, I thought that's where you were going. This kind of portentous world of the potential,
right,
lurking somewhere, who knows where. There's nowhere for it to lurk.
Yeah.
So should we go on to 13.8?
Next step is still at this space-time nexus in your illusion, achieving its progression as you may see it in your illusion. The next step is an infinite reaction to the creative principle, following the law of one and one of its primal distortions, freedom of will. This many, many dimensions, infinite in number, are possible. I think that points to what you were saying, Nathan. This many dimensions. The energy moves from the intelligent infinity due first to the outpouring of randomized creative force. This then creating patterns which in a holographic style appear as the entire creation, no matter which direction, or energy is explored. These patterns of energy begin then to regularize their own local, shall we say, rhythms and fields of energy, thus creating dimensions and universes.
So why do we use the word randomized instead of saying random? There must be a randomizer then, and that I presume is the creator.
It's
Unorganized?
when in random number generation on computers, you always have a random seed. You have a seed number that you feed into the random number generator that then creates all the random sequences. But you have a seed, right? And I wonder if that seed is kind of like maybe the seed of the octave.
Well, it grammatically, it seems to suggest that the energy moving forth from intelligent infinity is in intelligent infinity randomized as creative force. However, if we go with your earlier interpretation of intelligent infinity as having this seething cauldron of potential lurking within it, one might suppose that the intelligent infinity is simply channeling this random creative force, not randomizing itself, just channeling this random creative force, which is what you have been calling chaos.
With the idea being that manifestation is kind of this sink into which this chaos comes and then emerges out kind of. I'm thinking of like a bunch of coins being dropped into the Coinstar machine and then they come out in rolls. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in a simplified version, but something like that.
I'm using
Okay. They come out rolled with intelligent coins.
yes.
And therein lies the potential for chaos re-inaugurated.
But it implies that the process of consciousness in life is this kind of organizing of this primordial chaos, right?
Yeah.
Kind of this way in which it gets kind of like reconstituted. Maybe not reconstituted, since that implies that there's an original plan that it's conforming to. So it's this discovery creation dichotomy again, right?
Is this the concept that you were calling fractal, Stephanie? This notion here of the entire creation appearing holographically in every part, no matter which direction or energy is explored. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yes, that's how
Yeah.
I experience a lot of this
Yeah,
whole session.
I get it. That's a good point.
So one thing I want to bring up is they mention the first distortion in this passage, but now I think we're past the point where we would normally have located the first distortion, or did we get that wrong?
I think you're right with that.
This is
Okay. Run that question by me again, Jeremy.
it's just that they mention one of its primal distortions, freedom of will. When I first read this, I thought, oh, this is where the first distortion is. But I think that what this means is that this is one or two or several steps past the original distortion of free will that is more located in that focusing of awareness.
I have a question about free will and chaos and allowance. It seems like to me it seems like they're all sort of the same thing. That free will and chaos are like, maybe they're the same thing.
Well, they wouldn't be the same thing if you follow the order of thought as presented here, suggesting that free will is a primordial experience of the creator by the creator.
But
I'm kind of curious as to, like, can you go on and tell me more about how you're seeing those two things? I want to hear more, in other words.
So it feels like the nature of free will itself is chaos, because it's basically like openness to complete unpatterning, like anything, you know, and that not chaos is in randomness, but chaos is in just the opposite of order, like the potential for complete allowance, not requiring order. And that the you know, when in lots of cosmologies, when they talk about, like, in the beginning there's chaos, everything comes from chaos, you know, that maybe there's something, I you know, I'm not making an assumption, I'm just saying maybe there's something in this where free will and chaos are at least like closely related.
Yeah, that was the point I was trying to make at the beginning when I suggested that the pagans thought that the creation came out of chaos. That was that view, and that hasn't gotten a proper hearing except in sort of secretive corners ever since the various monotheistic theologies became predominant. But you're right. I think the important point in what you're noticing is that the chaos, the relation to that primordial chaos, is preserved in the creature as well as having been discovered as a portion of the creator. So in other, that's what it means that we are holographic representations of the creator. That and that's what it means to be fundamentally creative ourselves, and that's what it means to be free. So you're quite right in seeing that the two are connected, but they're not the same thought. They can be connected fundamentally, essentially in their structure, but without being the same thought.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking about it too, Steve, that they all have kind of like the same ground, but they're different levels of structure built on top of that ground, or they're more distorted or less distorted expressions of the same fundamental concept, right?
Right. But Autumn is quite right that they go together like a horse and carriage.
I would also point out that I really like the ideas you brought up about chaos, Autumn. And there is, if I'm not mistaken, a passage in the Law of One that talks about how what we consider to be randomness is, from the unified perspective, just a new kind of order that hasn't been recognized yet. And I think that fits in perfectly with what you said.
Right. And there is randomness is a concept associated with light. Light moves randomly in all directions in its primordial state. And so it's the way the creation actually functions is that light increasingly comes together in structured forms and creates the basis of an intelligible cosmos that functions in regular ways. Now the intelligibility that is realized in these cosmos, and there are many of them because each one is associated with a logos, is a function of the free will of that logos, but apparently that free will is experienced in ways sufficiently similar so it's not an absolute shock when you move from one cosmos to another, although Ross says it did baffle their imagination when they tried wandering into another structure of logos.
Yeah, I think Earth is hard, right?
Yeah, but anyway, it's not random, and it won't become random because there is a template to the creation right from the outset. It's like casting this huge supply of energy out into the void, but in such a way that the energy will come back according to structured patterns. And I think the learning comes from the fact that each structure is not only a way of ordering events, but also has embedded within it a question, so that the what comes back to the logos is an answering of the questions that it has with regard to the creation. And I think that there are probably orders of unification of logoi such that these questions all build on each other, and so it's a vast network of intelligences that seems to be out there at play. And of course, we only have a very thin access to a very small portion of that huge universe. But raw will do in a pinch. Yeah.
All right, we're past an hour. I wonder how much longer people want to go here. We've covered a lot of ground.
I need to head out, but I do want to I would love to continue this because I want to get to the place where we talk about love and light. And Steve, you talked about light emanating in all directions, and I'm I find it very difficult to put this stuff into words, but I see waves. Yeah, I can't put it into words. I'm just going to stop. But I want to talk about love and light and the nature
I can
of
tell you
love and light.
what quantum mechanics does when it reaches an impasse like that. They call it a wavicle. Is it a particle? Is it a wave? No, it's a wavicle. What is that? Search me. Yeah. Okay, Stephanie. Good seeing you. I'm willing to carry on with whoever would like to continue the discussion. I don't have a place I've got to be. So Jamie, am I wrong in showing hesitation about those formulations you've given?
No, it's all up for discussion.
Yeah.
I've not like buried myself to them. I just it's fun to hear a different perspective sometimes, and then hear the reactions. And
do you see my the basis of my response about objectivity?
I think I do. I mean, I don't.
You're more of a
Sounding ignorant. I don't fully
interjective sort of person yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, well, at the risk of sounding ignorant, I don't know that I really like understand objectivity or subjectivity fully. Like, I know that you are a philosophy professor, and so you probably have like a very clear and defined way of viewing those concepts. But
Well, actually, this was a big problem in physics, and when the quantum mechanicists and the relativity theorists got together and tried to decide what the ultimate nature of reality was, and the quantum mechanics folks said that there is no nature of reality in itself without taking into account the perspective of the observer.
right.
And Einstein said, in relation to that can't possibly be true ultimately, because God does not play at dice. That was the quote. But no, it's just not a question. It's not a question merely of probability. It's a question of there's the world, whatever the way the world is, it is that way. And it's our job as physicists to find out how that functions. Now, it may require changing our conceptual structure beyond recognition as we get deeper and deeper into the question. But the whole point of being a physicist is we're trying to understand the way reality works, and the presumption based on that effort is that however it works, that's the way it works.
That's the presumption. The presumptive looking for the necessity.
Yeah, right.
But who knows if they're skipping over and looking for that, right?
Yeah. And the quantum mechanicists say you'll never answer that question without taking into account the perspective of the observer.
Right.
Well, isn't the is the observer effect is like a known thing, though, right?
Well, it is, but
but I'm speaking about something else.
No. It's a known thing up to a point, but it tells you what it points you in the direction of is an ultimate unknowability. And so,
Mystery. It all resolves to mystery.
yeah. I mean, they like to define it, more finely than that, but it's an ultimate unknowability. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But then they want an objective universe. They desperately want one. It is a bias of their entire outlook on the world that they want to conceive that there's one explanation that can account for everything.
Yeah,
And I think that's kind of wild.
the unified field theory. Yeah.
Yes.
right. Okay. Huh.
But they haven't found it yet because they can't get the relativity theorists and the quantum mechanicists to sit down at the same bargaining table and use the same bargaining chips.
Yep. It's Kuhn all over. Like it's all a social process, right?
Well, it's not that it's important that we've arrived at this particular conundrum.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's that. But what I was suggesting is a more phenomenological approach to a reading of this material, and what you're getting from Claire is not that. It's more analytic philosophy, and you bring in these concepts like objectivity and the differentiation of object, but really the whole point of the grounding of the creator in that first act of becoming aware is that it is not objectifying consciousness. It's
And
not.
we use the word act advisedly, right?
Yeah. Well, phenomenology uses it centrally. The act of being conscious. Yeah.
I only say advisedly because outside of a time sequence, it changed, or maybe this isn't the case with phenomenologists, but I would think that outside of a time sequence, a before and after of an action or of an event would be less determined.
Well, the text to read, by the way, if you're interested in this sort of thing, is Husserl's Phenomenology of Internal Time Consciousness, and it's an attempt to get at the way in which objectifying consciousness first emerges. But it's highly self-referential, just let me say that.